Hello. So, turns out that when you move to another country, the laws regarding taxes and imports for things like alcohol and tobacco are the same as if you just go on vacation, which means I can only bring 2 bottles of alcohol with me, otherwise I have to pay money for taxes when I move to Canada at the end of the week. So that means whiskey at 3 in the afternoon. Oh yeah. So we've been working on for the last couple of streams, some rather obscure corners of Diesel and Rust, and have spent a lot of time in procedural macro hell. And I know we've had some people tuning in who are newer to Rust, and I also just want to break from obscure macro hell. So today we're gonna work on something a little bit more normal, for lack of a better word. So I had somebody in our Gitter room who's using Diesel for a project and had a bunch of SQL queries, and they were looking for how to represent most of it as in Diesel. So I've got a list of just small little things that need to get added. Nothing too crazy. There's one that might get a little interesting. Yeah, so let's take a look at the first one. If I can get everything sized properly. So one of the things that was needed is support for the overlapped operator for Postgres arrays, which is double ampersand, because that is clear to somebody. So I thought I'd demonstrate how we go about adding new operators like that. It's actually quite easy. So we're going to go into our Postgres expression array comparison module. Now we're not going to use the double ampersand operator in Rust to map to the double ampersand operator in Postgres for 2 reasons. The first being that we can't actually overload the return type of double ampersand in Rust to be anything other than bool. And second, I probably wouldn't do that even if we still could. This module is getting a little messy and is sort of becoming a dumping ground. So I'm actually gonna move this to a couple of files. I'm not going to break apart this file for now, but I am going to move it to the directory form. And then we'll do pubmod. Do we need this in another module? I actually don't think we do, because actually the place that I'm going to put most of this code is somewhere else. So we tend to have a bunch of these little traits that are called expression methods. And here we sort of have them all in the same place. These are the Postgres specific ones. But they're basically just places where we put traits that add a few methods meant to work with expressions, and then we implement it for all traits, or for all types that are an expression of the appropriate type. We don't have very many of them for PG, because most of them just aren't PG specific. We do have a lot of them, like global expression methods is pretty big, and this includes all of the various methods that exist for every expression. Things like equality, is not null. Comparison operators, which surprisingly you can actually use with any type in SQL. I guess it's not that surprising, actually. At least not for the ANSI types. Anyway, so we're gonna create a new one here. We'll start with the actual expression methods trait, and that'll let us write a test. So we're gonna create pub trait. What are we gonna call this? Array expression methods. And the double ampersand operator, we'll call that overlaps with. And I'm not specifying the SQL type that is the superclass of this, because array is not a type. Array of X is a type. And I could do this, but I don't know. I just don't really want to. So I'm gonna put the constraint that it only appears on array types in the impl instead of on the trait itself. So we'll take anything that can be converted to an expression with the same type. These all look almost exactly the same, unless they have stranger interfaces like between. And that's all there is to it. We do need to add the documentation. I'm gonna steal some of this setup. So we'll create a table posts, and that'll have tags. And when you're writing a doc example like this, when you put any line with a pound in front of it, that will still get run as normal code. It just doesn't appear. And then the reason I'm having to write the main function directly is because I need to add this macro use annotation on extra and create diesel. That's not there by default. Otherwise, I would probably need a little bit less setup. And this include doc test sub. This includes like all kinds of random stuff, mostly just things to create to establish the connection and create the table that I use for most of my examples. And I could not find a better way to share code between multiple documentation examples, which isn't normally a thing that is reasonable to do, but when your library is entirely focused around interacting with SQL databases, you tend to have a little bit more setup for doc examples that can actually be run than you otherwise would. So that's why we have to do that. So we'll go ahead and get the connection. And then create that post table. And I tend to for like these one-off create table statements, I try to keep everything wrapped to 80 lines usually, but for stuff like this in doc examples, I tend to let it slide. All right, so let's let's create, I guess, 2 posts. Let's actually just do that here. Make use of that macro that we wrote in the last stream so that I can actually easily do these. It was actually kind of painful to have examples like this previously because I can't use diesel cogen inside of diesel. I mean, in theory, I could have diesel cogen because I could, in theory, use the latest released version of diesel cogen, which depends on the latest released version of diesel to build my current version of diesel, but that sounds awful. So we don't do that. But in theory, we could have diesel bootstrap itself with diesel cogen, but that's part of why I wanted to have this macro, is so that I can more easily use it from diesel's test suite, and in our migrations module. So we will set up our data. Now we're in the actual doc example, so let me not indent this so that looks like it's just a one-off thing. I think in this case I'm going to keep like the data here just to make it clear to the reader like what we're querying against. And I don't know, we'll tag things as cool and awesome. And this one can be awesome, great. And cool and great. Some very cool posts. And then also do this. So we'll select ID, and then we'll filter where tags overlaps with that. And I'll give us back 1 and 3. We'll give a couple of examples here. So we'll do another one where we expect it to overlap with whoops. Cool or great. That'll give us back everything. We'll do one more that gives back nothing. All right. That's fine, right? We need to actually make that work. So we'll go here. So this is how we create predicates. We actually just have a macro that we call, and all we're gonna have to do here is infix predicate, and we'll call it overlaps with. Give it the sequel to put in the middle, and tell it that the backend is PG. Otherwise, I'll implement it for SQLite as well. Chat, you're very quiet today. This one's just tea. Although maybe I should spike it with whiskey. I seriously have to drink all of my whiskey. Like, by Friday. And actually, speaking of moving, so there will be no stream this weekend, nor will there be any stream next week. Because this weekend I will be living out of a hotel room in Denver and have a few going away parties that I'm going to be at all day. And then next week I'm at RailsConf all week. And I do intend to stream when I'm at conferences some of the time, but RailsConf will be far too busy. Okay, that's interesting. That failed because of an error with the... So it's this that's failing. That's saying nothing expected. Or no, it would have to be this one. The other one wouldn't have matched. Oh, I know what it is. It's me enforcing the trailing comma there. And while sometimes I enforce the trailing comma as a matter of opinion, in that case I actually have to enforce the trailing comma because there's a limited number of tokens that a tie can be followed by. An arbitrary token tree is not one of those. Can't be followed by. It can be followed by fat arrow, comma, equal sign, pipe, semicolon, colon, greater than, square bracket, curly brace, as or where. So a lot of things. You know, I actually could. Alright. Not going to spend too much time in macro hell here, but we can totally... we can totally fix this. You know what? No. It's gonna get ugly. I don't want to do that right now. we'll just enforce the trailing comma. Anyway, so that's it. That's all we have to do to add support for the Postgres double ampersand operator. So we can actually, while we're here, we may as well be thorough. So I'm going to pull up. So we might not do all of these, but we'll do some of them. I'm not gonna deal with these yet. We are gonna add string concatenation today, but like, and these ones don't seem like they'd be too bad for us to add. Stuff like this, though, just I'm imagining that type signature is going to be awful. So I'm not positive if we support the comparison No, of course we support the comparison operators for arrays. We support the comparison operators for everything. But we can add support for contains and is contained by. And in fact, that's, I think, a great name for those methods. How did this test pass? We have not implemented this trait for anything. I don't think that test ran. Yeah, okay, no, that's fine. That should be failing with no method error. Shouldn't be able to find the overlaps with function. Oh, did I kill? I must have killed it before it got to the doc tests. And one of the important things to note, too, that's an interesting way for it to have failed. Oh, okay. Now I see why. One of the things to note about the way all of this is set up is that there's nothing that we're doing here that needs to be in Diesel. You could very easily add support for new types, other operators that we forgot or opted not to handle, functions. I think I said operators, but I didn't say operators, and whatnot from a third-party crate. Because extensibility via public API is a very important design philosophy to me. In fact, I've got a demo up. It should be on the Diesel RS org now. Let me double check. Yeah, so it's called Diesel Full Text Search, and it's a little one file thing, and it adds support for all of the full text search functions and types that are in that Postgres extension. Because like Diesel's not going to support everything. Part of the reason for a lot of these design philosophies is something that's maintainable and easy to keep free of bugs. And if it tries to support literally everything ever for every backend, the surface area of that API is going to be huge and very bug prone. But people still need to be able to do stuff, and I'm not going to think of or cover everything. So we designed it from the get-go to be very easy for you to add support for whatever's missing if you need it. Okay, that's how we're expecting it. No method named overlaps with. So now we just need to impl. We do need to do this. So if we don't put it here, we couldn't put the constraint on the impl. That means we'll need to use that. Well, that's it. We're effectively monkey patching. Well, in theory, we're effectively monkey patching everything, but in practice, the only things that implement expression are stuff that either is from Diesel or specifically meant to work with Diesel. So we're kind of monkey patching our own stuff. One thing that is unfortunate, and part of the reason we've shied away, like we have operator support, but we also have methods that map to each of the operators, and part of the reason that we've done that is because I can't. So we have an internal, or not even internal, but we have a trait called add, which represents the SQL type is what it's implemented on. So for example, integer implements add, where right-hand side is integer and output is integer. Now, right-hand side in our add trait is an associated type instead of a, I think it's an associated type, instead of a type parameter. And this doesn't contain any behavior. Like it's not like the trait from the standard library where it has behavior. This is all just type information that we use to calculate like what expression X plus expression Y returns and whether or not that it's valid to add those two types together. Because, for example, you can add an interval to a timestamp. Anyway, so what I wish I could do is implement standard ops add for all types that have a SQL type that implements add, Diesel's add, but I can't. Use of undeclared type or module users. Did I leave users in our friggin' macros? No? I didn't say users here. I said posts. Oh. Right, because I'm declaring the users table in other tests. I will address that later. And for now, I'm just going to Like, I'm pretty sure I can just put this in the doc test setup, but that is actually, probably going to cause a few other tests to fail, because I think I have one or two doc examples that have a slightly different schema. But it's not super relevant to what we're doing, so I'm just going to stick that in there for now with y'all in chat should say something. You've been so quiet. This whole dynamic doesn't work as well if I don't have people continuously telling me why my code is dumb. Huh. Still failing. Okay, let's do this. It apparently does not like that nested vec. And I don't want to add type annotations. So I won't. Oh, and I guess I should probably mention, if you, for people who are watching who aren't familiar with Rust, in case it isn't clear, when you have code examples that appear inside of your documentation, those get run as part of your test suite. So for features that don't have a ton of edge cases, where I would basically only write the one test that's like, this feature compiles and works, I almost never nowadays write a explicit test case for that in our main test suite, and instead just have the documentation examples be the test suite for that feature. Alright, come on. Come on, work this time. Oh, what am I doing wrong now? me open an issue for that really fast, actually, because that should have compiled. But I'm not working on macro stuff today. But I'm just gonna make an issue so I remember to fix this later. All right. Yeah, so there's just something here where it can't. We can't figure something out. I have a feeling if I do this, it'll be fine. So I'm just gonna do that. So excited to have the separate streaming card so that my compile times go back to a reasonable amount of time. For those of you who haven't turned into the stream, no, diesel does not normally take this long to compile. It's just because I have the video encoder using all of my CPU. Okay, this is getting frustrating. I did not expect this to be this difficult. Well, the feature's working. It's just oh god damn it. Problems when you design an API that involves copy pasting your struct definition. When you make changes, you have to remember to go copy paste those changes. if there's a way I can make this use less CPU. I wonder if changing the bit rate would help. I feel like this is not a setting I want to mess around with now. Why is that still failing? Okay, you know what? How much you want to bet? As soon as I do this, it'll work fine. Because now the type inference has a local variable for it to realize, oh, of course I'm making a vector of new post. I should pay attention to this error message. It's failing in assert EQ. I'm dumb. This is not what's failing. It is down here. And it's failing because this needs to know that it wants an integer. Of course. So over here it can infer what we're loading the query into because it can just compare it to this side over here. But down here, when there's no elements in the vector, it doesn't know what it's a vector of, and therefore it doesn't know what it's loading the query into. Really helps if you actually read the full error message sometimes. Occasionally. Has anybody played the new Hearthstone expansion yet? I made a deck with 24 spells, 4 minions that have spell written on them, and Bran, Bronzebeard, and Yogg-Saron, and it is fun. Maybe not competitive, but it's fun. Since this is Twitch, I've kind of been toying with this like dual live stream of Hearthstone, and then I program on my opponent's turn. But that would probably not. Might be entertaining. I don't know. I feel like programmers and Hearthstone people who watch Hearthstone streams aren't really hugely overlapping sets. Why? Oh, relation post already exists. Because it's connecting, right. Well, compiled that time. The reason it's doing that is because it's just connecting to the database URL environment variable, which is the same one I run for our integration test suite, which does have a table called posts. It's fine for me to just mess with the schema here, though, because it's inside of a transaction. And Postgres can actually deal with changing the schema inside of transactions, unlike MySQL or SQLite. Okay. So, we recently eliminated the varchar type from Diesel and changed varchar to be an alias for text. And the reason being, on all of our supported backends, they are in fact the same. Like internal representation and what have you. And for Postgres, there's an implicit conversion between varchar and text that exists and works everywhere. And I remember when I was writing this, like, I've triple checked. This will not affect 99% of uses. There is one minor caveat, which is that the implicit conversion between varchar array and text array doesn't exist, even though they are the same type representation internally. And you can insert a text array into a column of type varchar array, but you can't use certain functions or operators. And we discussed it and basically came to the conclusion that the gains that we got by having varchar and text be the same type in Diesel was worth like having the one gotcha of, if you're using string arrays in Postgres, make sure you call it a text array and not a varchar array, but I have clearly forgotten that. And really, Postgres should just have a simplistic conversion, and it's rather annoying that it doesn't. Also, I feel like there should have been a space there. I forgot the space, that's why. Interesting that that's still valid SQL, actually. I think it's interesting that if I scroll between screens, the video seems to twitch a little bit. So if I hold it right here, it awkwardly shows like half of it. Maybe it doesn't. I just noticed in the preview that it twitches a little bit whenever I switch between screens. Definitely resize it if I do this, right? Yeah. Alright. Wait, did we pass it already? I think we passed it already. Yeah, okay. Where is it? What was it called? Overlap. Yep, okay, finally. Finally, we have written a passing test successfully. Okay, so now let's do the same for contains and is contained by. So contains is at greater than, very clear, and is contained by is less than at. No, I almost want to, no, that would be terrible. I was about to say, I almost want to implement this, instead of implementing it for T where T is implements expression, I almost want to implement it for T where T implements as expression. So that way I could just like write my documentation examples to quite literally be the same as Postgres's examples, where I just put some array literals and compare them and say whether it should be true or false. But number one, I don't think that would work because type inference wouldn't be able to figure out the SQL type. And number two, we're about to add a method called contains, which I believe already exists on Vec. So that wouldn't even work, because the inherent method would always win over a trait method. Getting good about remembering to turn this off. Not leaving the documentation for standard any on screen for 10 minutes while I write code. Alright, so let's... I'm actually just going to do this. Compares whether an array contains we'll just have a little bit of a simpler test case here. And the method needs to be called contains. Oh, sorry, I will do that. And actually, I will just close this when I'm not working on it, so that way it is not... Try to figure out the right corner for me to put this, so that, like, it was the least used. Maybe up here is better, but that feels like a weird place to be. I don't know. I'll try being up here for a little bit, see if that's better. You know, I might actually get a green screen after the move, since I've now invested in a encoding card, so, or a video capture card rather. So it's like, may as well go whole hog and get a green screen at that point. Oh god, I probably need dedicated hardware for that too, though, to keep it from using all my CPU. Oh goody, test failed. As because this should be contains, not overlaps with. And I'm going to go ahead and write out the test for is contained by. And I'm just going to swap I actually don't know if two equal arrays are considered. I'm sure. Yeah, of course, it must be. Is contained by. All right, I'll do this. Yes, I am on a MacBook. I do have the big computer over. Wait, let me get the live preview over here, which I will probably switch to streaming from after the move, but it is not set up for development because I try to keep my gaming machine pure and free of work-related things, but ultimately the hardware, I got an external card to start, but I will ultimately need to switch to a PCI card, and I don't want to spend $1,000 on I need a second monitor to really like be reasonable with this whole situation and not be switching between screens a ton. And I'm not gonna give Apple $1,000 for a cinema display. So actually, I don't know what I'm gonna do because now that I think about it, I'm gonna be streaming from the office during the week because they have nice soundproof rooms. I have no clue what I'm gonna do actually. All right, cool. Those all passed. Arrays done. Hey Mike. Hey Mike, since you're watching right now, can I get a +1 on this? So that way I don't have to do a pull request. I'm gonna write the commit message while I wait for the stream to catch up. Was there anything else to say about this? I don't think so. Oh yeah. All right, Mike. I'm gonna assume since you're watching that I'm good to merge that. So YOLO. All right, so we'll do one more. One of the other things I want to add is casting. For Postgres. And usually we don't add too many of these like little random functions, especially if they have complex argument types, because it'd be a real pain for us to define it generically, and it is absurdly simple. It's absurdly simple to define a sort of a little one-off thing if you need it. Specifically, let me pull up some docs. We have this, where is it? We have this macro called SQL function. Basically, you give it the name of the function, the name of the function again, followed by _t, because I can't do this for you, because concat idents doesn't work. And then the argument types and the return types, just using a standard Rust type signature, but you would use a diesel SQL type. And you can just define this anywhere. You can define this like as a one-off thing inside of another function even. And so the reason we usually recommend that is, so for example, if you have a string column, but you need to cast it to timestamp, and we don't have a general purpose cast method or anything like that. There are multiple things that can be defined that can be casted to timestamp. And you'll notice, right, we don't have any way to like define multiple possible argument types here. And I've considered maybe adding support for that, where like you would do a varchar pipe something else, and it would allow then any of those types. But that might get really tricky to do, because Rust doesn't allow overloading of function names with different argument types. But if you know it's a string column in that one place, right, it's absurdly easy to just be like you know, function doing stuff, right? And inside of here you can just go one-off, like just as a one-off thing you can do SQL function. Right, and this doesn't leak into any global namespace. It's just here. So then, when you need to convert your text to timestamp, it's like, you know, dot filter text column, or like timestamp text column greater than now minus 2 days, or something like that, right? But like something where you need to convert it to a timestamp. And we don't define this general conversion because, like I've looked at general ways to map Postgres's type casting rules into Diesel, and basically without specialization that includes the lattice rule, or negative reasoning, I don't see a good way for us to do it without it being terrible. It's just slightly less terrible. So we normally don't provide casting functions because it's just really easy for you to do it one-off where you need it. and it will be much cleaner and easier for you to be able to do it than it will be for us to. ATL, yes. So Mike, who's MF Piccolo up there, is working on some generic bindings to Node, which actually just straight up exposes Diesel's query builder at runtime, which is slightly different than what I'm thinking of doing for Ruby. But if that works well for Node, I will probably expose the same to Ruby. But Diesel Rails is sort of a thing, and it involves actually generating the Rust code and then compiling it and linking it automatically for you. That is nowadays most likely going to just work with Helix, which is the new name for Turbo Ruby, which if you're interested in, I believe either Yehuda or Godfrey are doing a talk on it at RailsConf. Anyway, so that's why we don't provide casting functions generally in Diesel. But there is one special case, which is text, because literally everything can be cast to text. And now that I've said all of that, that wasn't even the thing that I was planning on doing next, but is related. Yeah, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and do a text function. I just gave all of that stuff. I can't not do it. The thing I actually wanted to add was string concatenation next. And I don't know why in my mind I'm like, let's talk about adding text conversion. So I'm just gonna put it here for now. I don't know. We'll put it here. All right, so what we're gonna do is so we're gonna have a function called text, and we're gonna take anything that is an expression. Now, normally you take as expression, but the reason that we're taking expression here is because we don't know the SQL type of it, and because of that, we can't infer the SQL type to pass to as expression. And really the only practical results of this is that you won't be able to pass a random Rust value here. You'll have to pass like an actual AST node, something like a column. But I don't see much reason that you would ever want to pass a random Rust literal that isn't a string and cast it to text. Like, you'd never pass an integer to this. A Rust integer, that is. Like, you would just convert that to a string in Rust. And normally I'd use a SQL function macro for something like this, but in this case, we don't have a known argument type, so I'm going to write it out by hand to show sort of what goes into actually adding a new AST node. We're going to need like everything from the query builder module. We're going to need backend trait. We're going to need PG, because this is PG specific. And I think that's everything. This is public. So the first thing we implement is this trait called query fragment. Which is basically our general like walk the AST and convert things to SQL trait. And it's 3 functions. Oops. That is the wrong trait. These are the functions. So the first is toSQL, which takes the query builder and actually pushes the SQL onto the AST visitor. So in this case, we're going to push the SQL text followed by an opening parenthesis. We're going to push whatever our inner stuff is by closing parenthesis, and that's it. Second is to collect any bind parameters that we might have. In this case, we don't have any bind parameters, but our inner piece might. And even though I could write this as like removing the try and then or removing the try, the semicolon, and the okay, I prefer to write it this way because as I add and remove lines, this code doesn't change for unnecessary reasons, and I care a lot about git churn. And the last one is whether or not this is safe to use in a prepared statement. There is nothing inherent about this node that makes it unsafe, so the answer to this question is just whether our inner node is safe to cache as a prepared statement. This is a trait I implement a lot. I've thought about ways for some of these more simple cases. Like there's macros for some of the common cases, but nothing for query fragment specifically. We might in the future. So the next thing we're going to implement is expression. And expression only has one thing, it has no behavior. It's only used for type stuff. And a text node is always going to be of type text. Finally, we need to implement the query ID trait. This one is always trivial to derive, so I have a macro for that. And I think that's everything. We'll write a really minimal example for this. And we're really just gonna do like we're just gonna cast ID to text here. and note like, oh, and look, now we can load this into a string. I might show like a more meaningful example when I add things like concat, which is more what this is meant for. What? Backend is a trait. Oh. That's the problem. And so this is a lot of like what's left in Diesel is just finding like these random little functions for whatever backend that aren't supported but should be, and adding them. Yeah, I'm not going to support everything in every backend ever, but like things that feel sufficiently generic. Thanks, Mike. Mike recently did a pull request that denies missing debugger copy implementations because I forget them all the time. And like this is a type that should totally implement debug and copy. Anyway, yeah. So we try and make it really easy to add some one-off things when needed, but like that's a lot of the work that's left is just finding these little functions and adding support for them as they pop up, and you know, most of them are pretty low priority right now. I'm mostly focusing on things that I expect to require breaking changes to implement because we're trying to push to 1.0, and there's no reason that something like this needs to be done pre 1.0 because I do not expect it to require breaking changes to the API to add. But at the same time, one of the nice things about still being small is that I have a lot more communication with most users compared to something like Rails. And so if somebody pops into Git or opens an issue saying, I'm using Diesel or I'm thinking about using Diesel and I need to be able to do X, like that can shoot to the top of the priority list. That can never be true of Rails these days. In fact, most of my time in Rails is me explaining to people, no, and here's why we'll never add this or make this change to Rails. Which is a very different experience. This is also why I don't stream my work on Rails, by the way. Number one, because it is my full-time day job, so I also tend to like randomly be popping out for meetings and things. That's the first part. And the second reason is that I don't write that much code for Rails these days. Most of my work on Rails is doing issue triage, and when I am writing code, it's mostly me staring at a terminal trying to figure out why some obscure bug is happening. Did I mean to close that delimiter? Yes, probably. Yes, I did. And I forgot macro use diesel. That said, I need to find an excuse to stream Rails stuff, because I feel like it would probably draw a decent-sized crowd. Anyway, so that's why, for example, like I'm randomly supporting the array operators now, is because somebody needed the double ampersand operator for arrays, so now it's there. And if I'm going to add those, I may as well add contains and is contained by while I'm there. I think we're going to do a shorter stream today because I got to get back to packing pretty soon. Oh, I probably need to import the text function, don't I? Expected item found semicolon. Oh, yeah. Does help to do that. But I do need to diesel expression. We tend to not re-export functions like this in the prelude module or at the top level, because they tend to have really, I mean, we do export some functions at the top level with really generic names like insert, but text is not a name I would be comfortable with, like, having in a place that people glob import. But if you guys do Ruby for your normal stuff and are planning on going to conferences, I'll be at RailsConf, followed by SelfConf, followed by Twilio Signal. So if you're planning on attending any of those, come say hi. Mike, I'm speaking in Sacramento too, right? Did we ever set that up? I think so. I'm just going to announce it before he has a chance to reply. Also, I'm speaking in Sacramento at the local Ruby user group. Oh, I need to implement selectable expression. That's the one I'm forgetting. So we have two traits that I've been meaning to figure out a good way to merge into one, but haven't quite gotten to a place that I feel comfortable with. First is expression, and the second one's called selectable expression. And selectable expression takes a query source, and this is how we enforce that you can't select a column from another. I also need to do this, where I can do it over here. T expression. And this is how we enforce things like that you can't select columns from other tables. And also where we enforce things like if something's on the right-hand side of a left outer join, it becomes nullable, because a selectable expression optionally takes a SQL type. And actually, I need to implement... I need to implement this twice, because this needs to be nullable if the inner is nullable. For both of these, actually. And same thing here. So this will be... Actually, I don't think we need to specify it. I need to add a explicit compile fail test for this. This is one of the pain points where we where our semantics kind of clash with SQL semantics, because SQL doesn't really care about whether something is or isn't nullable, and it lets nulls just sort of float around. We can't do that. So we've sometimes run into some weird cases. Oh, why do those conflict? All right, if I write it this way, will it not conflict? They don't conflict, but I'm pretty sure Rust is does not take associated types into account when it determines whether they conflict or not. And that becomes problematic, because casting null to text returns null, and this could be used to bypass our safety guarantees on nullability and cause a runtime error, which would be bad. So I'm gonna, I guess, ping some people on Rustling and see if we can get that fixed, because I don't think I can actually add this function. Well, you know what I can do? I can add this function and just not support nullable cases. Yeah, I can just have us not support nullable columns for now, and that will be fine. So the one thing that's really annoying to me about Rust is that it tries to be helpful, like too helpful, and it can see that if we satisfy this not null constraint here, it will satisfy the constraint of text t infante expression, but nowhere in this error message does it ever mention the constraint that it is actually failing to find. And I've had to remove a bunch of blanket impls actually to try and improve our error messages, because, for example, if you in older versions of Diesel were to accidentally try to use a string in a position where only an integer was valid, the error message that Rust would give you would be string does not implement the trait column, which of course you would never do, but it would see that that all columns are expressions and also implement selectable expression for their table. And so it just sees if we implement column for string, everything works, even though you would never implement column for string. Sean looks at compiling Diesel, the stream. If you guys are interested, by the way, let me move this over to the other window so I can show. So here's some of the more complex things that Diesel can handle. This one in particular, I'm pretty happy with. Or actually, where is it? Down here. Basically, this just comes from somebody popped in our getter and posted like a long gist of a bunch of SQL functions that they or SQL queries that they wanted to use Diesel to write, and they were all like reasonably complex. Most of them weren't too complex. This one was pretty complex, but even like the reasonably simple ones were just different enough that it's sort of thing that would tend to not be friendly to ORMs. So I sort of went through it and was just like, how much of this can diesel actually handle? Because diesel's meant to really handle the sort of things that that most RMs can't. And yeah, I left comments for myself in here for all of the things that aren't implemented, and this is where all the things that we've worked on this afternoon came from. But you know, we can do cool stuff like subtract dates from other dates. And stuff like that. I mean, if you're just interested in this, it's got some examples of how to build pretty complex queries with Diesel. All of the links to the gists are in our Gitter room from this afternoon, and you can find a link to that in the README for the repo. I think it's just gitter.im/dieselrs/diesel. It wants me to have a name field on here. Well, Mike, it won't matter once I get my encoding card and it goes back down to 15-second compile times because 80% of my CPU is not being used up by my video encoding. And I don't have this. This line at the top, this is why Diesel is taking so long to compile. And that is split across all of my cores. Demagomogum. If you are using SQLite, Upsert is supported on master right now. Oh, you specified PG. No, I can add that on Thursday if you'd like. It is planned for 0.7 either way. So close. So close and yet so far away. Alright, we're going to take one more swing at this. See what silly thing I forgot this time. Unresolved name connection. Right, it's supposed to be established connection. Alright, this is going to be the last pass because whoop. Please, somebody just like delete a bunch of files. But yeah, Demagomogum. The API that I'm intending is gonna basically be like your full insert statement. So insert blah 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 dot into dot on conflict set, and then you would pass that set function the same arguments that you would pass set on an update statement, and that would generate the SQL on conflict do update. I need to double check if Postgres handles the semantics of what row to update for you. I feel like it does. And if it doesn't, then I'll have you pass it a full update statement. We added SQLite first just because somebody specifically requested it, and SQLite semantics for Upsert are absurdly simple, and were just really easy to add. It took like less than an hour. All right. So that's passed. I'm gonna let the rest of the integration test suite finish running while that runs. If anybody has any questions about Diesel, Rust, Rails, things we did on the stream, things we didn't do on the stream, things you'd like me to do on the stream, or any general feedback, now's the time to ask it, because once this test suite finishes running, I'm gonna go get myself some dinner. The next stream will be on Thursday at the same time, 3:30 p.m. That one will be a slightly longer stream. We're going to work on adding upsert for Postgres because somebody asked. So that should be good. That'll probably take 2 hours, I think will be the length of that stream. If you don't follow me on Twitter, you can. I am at SGRIF. I'd love to hear any feedback you have about the stream. The schedule that I did announce the schedule recently, that schedule is going to change because I realized I should not commit to a schedule when I am on Friday moving to a time zone that is 2 hours later than where I'm living right now. So the actual schedule will likely be the one that I announce, but 2 hours later on all of the days. I will be tweeting for sure when I decide what that schedule is after I've moved and am all settled. I'm not going to wait for the full integration test. It normally doesn't take that long to run, but I am now realizing it will have to recompile Diesel 8 times, and I don't want to wait for that with the video encoder running. So I'm going to go ahead and kill that. We have a lot of test suites, by the way. If you look at what we run on Travis, because we run it both for... actually, if you look at the file that I continuously run, it's probably a little more readable. Mainly this section is all the things that I run locally. So we test Diesel with both SQLite and Postgres enabled. We test Diesel CLI for both backends. We test CodeGen only for Postgres. We run the integration tests for both backends. And then we run our compile tests, which always compile against both. So a lot of test suites. Anyway, that's going to do it for the stream for today. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope I will see you on Thursday. Yeah, have a good one.